Hey, that looks as though that's everybody come in. So thank you very much for joining our webinar this morning. This is about the government's proposed reforms to the Licensing Act. It's a quick overview of the call for evidence that has been published. We have a very tight turnaround with responses due back in on the 6th of November. The consultation published about a week or so ago to give a quick overview of what it says, what it means, how this fits with sort of broader campaigning work that we are doing, and the ways in which it might be able to help businesses. So there will leave plenty of time at the end for questions, and we'll also have a follow-up with licensing specialists who want more of a deep dive next week. But if we can have the first slide, Izzy, please. Thank you. So, for those who don't know me, I'm Kate. I'm Chair of UK Hospitality. With me today is Jim Cathcart, our Policy Director. Jim and I have both worked on licensing intensively over the course of the last 20 years since the Act has been introduced and updated and amended as we go further forward. And we've been working closely with the government as they've taken forward some of these proposals for change. So, we are going to take you through the details today. I'm going to give an overview and an introduction, then I'm going to hand to Jim to take you through the 10 key policy outline areas that the government is looking at in the call for evidence. Next slide, please. So what is the call for evidence? So government has announced when it came in that it wanted to look at ways of cutting red tape and regulatory cost burdens to business. There is a 25% target of net administrative cost savings to businesses that is going to be delivered by the end of this Parliament. That's £6 billion of reduced costs. And while a lot of that will be covered in generic details that apply to all sorts of businesses, the government did want to try and prioritise licensing and planning, and this is the work stream that is being taken forward to look at licensing. And as I say, the main focus on this is reducing regulatory costs, the administrative burdens of the licensing regime in England and Wales, and trying to make it easier for businesses to navigate, remove unnecessary costs of doing business, and also to free up local authorities as well. So there is also a red tape reduction for local authorities. It's not a full formal consultation because these initial very first priority areas that have been identified, the government believes it can take forward at a simpler level without full statutory consultation. They are simpler changes, but they are crucially part of a broader package, so there will be more to come. So this is an initial call for evidence on areas that the government has already indicated that it intends to proceed, but it's a chance for them to capture any last minute issues, last minute concerns, or ways in which they can be practically implemented. And the objective, they hope, is to have an answer back on the call for evidence by the budget on the 26th of November. So these, as I say, simple, straightforward, pragmatic changes. But in order to become a reality, we do have to have a weight of numbers responding to endorse them to make sure that they are taken forward. We're nearly there on having them fully confirmed, but we do need to have this call for evidence endorsed by the sector as being helpful. Next slide. So just to put it in context, this is just a simple set of reforms. It's not a big package, nor is it being presented as something that is the answer to the industry's problems. We are very well aware that this is not a silver bullet to address the cost crisis that we're seeing as a result of the last budget. That will be taken forward in the campaigns, and we are continuing to work with the government around NICs and around business rates in particular, but also pushing the message around VAT as part of the budget campaign. So this is separate from that. And as I say, as part of the government's attempt to modernise and streamline business regulation. And they don't think that this will address the economic realities facing pubs, bars, restaurants and hotels. So our taxed out campaign will continue, but this is nevertheless a good set of proposed reforms, crucially industry-led and industry-requested, that have been made over the course of the last 18 months to 2 years to try and streamline unnecessary costs of doing business. So helpful steps. Next slide. And critically, what this intent is to try and recapture that original spirit of the licensing reform and licensing regime, which was it changed in 2003, took effect in 2005, and that was designed to free up businesses, to reduce the cost of administration, so that businesses could be free to deliver what modern consumers were wanting, and modern ways of delivering licensed services, better, more proportionate regulation, and only doing what was necessary to control and regulate the sale of alcohol and the provision of entertainment. The encouragement of more family-friendly premises and a more diverse set of premises, rather than being hamstrung by licensing conditions that might be out of date, and development of culture, and having culture at the heart of communities, where you've got regeneration being driven through hospitality and experiential leisure and cultural development. So that's what the purpose was when the government looked at revisiting the Licensing Act 20 years on. The starting point and the exam question that was given to the industry was, how do we best recapture that original intent? Is there a lot of information and over regulation that has come in since then that is getting in the way and preventing people from doing that? And particularly the changes to give primary voice to the police and to have it looked at as a crime and disorder issue has undoubtedly held back development, diversification, and innovation. So it was really an intent to recapture that the government looked at reviewing the Licensing Act. Next slide, please. And how did we get to this call for evidence? Well, the government asked a joint industry and government task force, a sprint task force that was done in very quick and short order, set up in May of this year. It reported in to government. It was set up by the Chancellor and the Deputy Prime Minister, or the then Deputy Prime Minister, to look at this issue. Set up in May, reported at the end of June, and government responded initially in early August to the recommendations of that task force. It was co-chaired by Nick Mackenzie of Green King, Gareth Thomas, the then hospitality minister. I co-chaired one of the working groups that was looking at process and procedure. John Collins of Live UK and the Institute of Licensing chaired a one looking at late night and higher risk premises, and Nick Mackenzie chaired one about lower risk and community premises, particularly independent pubs, neighbourhood restaurants, and we looked there at putting forward proposals that would reduce the cost of doing business, ease red tape, would be quick and easy to deliver, and those were the parameters that the government set us. Could it be done without a great deal of cost from government or funding from government? Could it be done within 6 months to a year? Did it need primary legislation? And we framed our recommendations accordingly to that. As well as being industry-led and driven, you had representatives from local government, police, enforcement bodies, other local government representatives, mayoral authorities, particularly in London and in Manchester, to make recommendations about delivering that change. And all of the changes were put forward had unanimity. So they've got a great deal of support, but we did come up with a lot of creative ideas. And you also had consultants and advisors who worked on local nighttime economy and creative and cultural industries. So as I say, over 6 weeks, very rapidly put together a report and recommendations, and the call for evidence seeks an endorsement of those recommendations that were derived and drawn up by the industry. So it's a review, uniquely, I think, a government review driven by industry, requested by industry, and government has endorsed and rubber stamped the industry's calls for reform. Next slide, please. Now, Jim's going to take you through these proposals in detail, but just to set the record straight, the newspaper reports, particularly in The Guardian and the BBC, that this was about unfettered extension of licensing hours is not the case. That's not something that the industry was calling for. It's not something that government is looking at. There is a separate private members bill that is going through that looks at deregulating hours for national events, those times where you get sports teams in the World Cup or the European finals, or you've got national events like Diamond Jubilees or the King's coronation. But that is not what these set of proposals are about. The reality is that it's about pragmatic, simple, straightforward changes that will help people in their day-to-day applications, will remove the burden of proof from the police in having sort of the predominant force and predominant request, will get back to capturing that necessary and proportionate set of controls, only doing what is necessary, granting applications in the way in which they are sought, and as I say, cutting red tape. So what we're proposing, and what has been proposed that the government is seeking responses on, a new national licensing policy framework which sits between the Act and the Section 182 guidance to licensing authorities, setting out how the government sees licensing policy operating to drive and deliver economic growth, and with a capacity for ministers to be able to give directions to licensing authorities in key areas where circumstances change, or where the government has cases brought before it that it wants to ensure you've got licensing policy implemented correctly, where the Act may be unclear or the guidance may be unclear. As part of that, they're consulting on whether they should include promotion of economic growth as a statutory licensing objective on top of protection of children, protection of public safety, prevention of noise and nuisance, and prevention of crime and disorder. So a positive statutory licensing objective, because you get lots of licensing committees that don't take account of that, and it's part of the regulatory requirement that the government is seeking to impose on all regulators. 20th anniversary amnesty on licensing conditions. A premises license MOT is what we're classifying it as, so that we can get the unnecessary conditions removed from licenses, ones that are particularly out of date, things where you're banning children, or you've got old restaurant conditions or old public entertainment conditions that could be dusted off. And as part of that, we will end up with a list of what is a minor condition that can be done by minor variations. A removal of the requirement to advertise in local newspapers, saving on average £300 per application, but in some cases £700. Extended outdoor trading and pavement licensing, with deregulation there to make it easier to ask for, and a longer term grant, so a minimum of 2 years rather than a maximum. Increasing the allowance for temporary event notices back up to the benefits that we had in COVID. Stronger rules against councils imposing blanket policies, cumulative impact in particular, or blanket hours or core restrictions. Improvements to evidence and data protocols so that you can get appeals and hearings dealt with fairly, transparently, and that you follow the rules of natural justice. Freeing up for festivals and events to make it easier to put on and give greater certainty. Strengthening of agent of change principle to protect existing premises, particularly in areas where you've got hospitality hubs, and then empowering those creation of those hospitality and leisure zones in local areas so you can incentivize growth and development. So Jim's going to go through those in more detail, but I think you'll agree that's a strong package of areas of cutting red tape and costs that would have a benefit to all. Next slide. So what the government is asking for, and has gone out for a call for evidence, clearly these were developed by industry, with industry, and we've had a strong input into it. So they know what we think, but we need to make sure that we've got an endorsement and a general agreement to this so that they can rubber stamp and press on. The call for evidence closes on the 6th of November. And we will go through at the end of the seminar and webinar as to how you can send us your views, and crucially how you can respond yourself. This is definitely going to be one of those cases where the government weigh the responses back. So we do need as many businesses as possible simply saying that yes, these are sensible, pragmatic, they would help, and that they're a first step, because crucially we are arguing that these are a first step in deregulating. So we want to get this one through the door and out as quickly as possible, endorsed and welcomed by the industry, so that we can move on to other bigger and more important areas, particularly around planning, And this is seen as a template for doing that and being able to do that. So, really important that we have that positive response. And the other reason it's important to have the positive response is that we know there's a lot of campaigners who will be opposing these, who will be calling for government to do different things, either to reject these altogether or calling for health as a licensing objective or for fees to be reviewed. We need to therefore make sure that we outweigh and drown out those voices of negativity so that we can secure these pragmatic reforms. And on that note, I'm going to hand to Jim, who's going to take you through the details of the call for evidence.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, so on to the next slide. Perhaps the most, perhaps the primary recommendation to come out of the task force that Kate mentioned was this call for a national licensing policy framework, and I think it's primarily to address one of the key issues coming out of the Act over the last 20 years, this issue around sort of inconsistency of approach, and how do we square the circle with that in terms of getting a national, a unified approach to some of the issues that we've seen, but also recognizing that the Act itself essentially works at a local level. And how do we get the balance between some form of national consistency versus each premises is on its own merits and local concerns being taken into account on the ground? So the solution is a licensing policy framework, which, as Kate says, sits in between the statutory guidance and the Act itself. And in essence, this is a vehicle to drive forward consistency and also some of the operational on the ground elements that local authorities can bring in relating to economic growth, cultural areas, and so on. So this, in essence, at the moment is giving a green light to this approach as part of its call for evidence. And that then in the future, being able to sort of populate this framework with examples of what local authorities should be doing on the ground in terms of encouraging growth via the licensing system. And in terms of sort of the benefits this is intended to bring, so some for local authorities, in the sense that if we get this right, it reduces disputes, judicial reviews, that sort of thing. And for the trade, some much needed consistency in some key areas, limit the need for constant appeals, constant challenges, and those sorts of things, and also day-to-day regulatory burdens. So when you're going through your response to the call for evidence, this is very much an agree. And there's some further questions they ask around the detail of that we'll address in our template response for those who want to go into a bit more detail in their responses on this. But really, this is around getting the answer to that question that sort of plagued licensing since the Act came in. How do we keep the local nature of it and the benefits that bring, but without, constant inconsistency when it comes to application and approach to licensing? Next slide, please. So this is a really interesting one that came out of the task force, this idea of an amnesty or an MOT or dusting down of licenses. So as people will know, I think a number of premises licenses have collected many conditions over the 20 years they've been in the Act, or they had conditions on them, when they were granted back in 2005 at the start that just have never been looked at again. So you will have conditions on licenses, and I think it's always important to remember that when a condition is on a license, that is a legal obligation. You have to do what is on that, technically, or you're in breach of license. So these are important things. And what should always be driving conditions is around, are they necessary? Are they proportionate? Are they relevant to that particular premises? They shouldn't be treated as, just a blanket, stick these on and, hope for the best type approach. That's not really well, not at all what these are for in the first place. So, yeah, in a way, a number of licenses, growing up over time, conditions appearing on there, things like hangovers from the pre-2003 Act on there. You've got conditions referencing legislation that has just been superseded and out of date. So you've got those conditions that are on there that are just not relevant anymore, but still connected to your license. You've got conditions potentially that were included in the license when the trading style was different. And then when the premises is looking to shift and evolve into a different way of operating, that can cause problems because technically, you're still beholden to the conditions that were on a license at that time. So the approach here is to sit down, have a look at everyone's license, and run through, those should be on there, those shouldn't be on there. One simple one-off process to get rid of the ones that are out of date, not needed, costly, disproportionate, and then almost carry on from that point with a refreshed license. And next slide, please. Yeah, and as we say, simple process. This is one where I think licensing authorities will probably be thinking, oh God, another process, this is more work for us and that sort of thing. And what we were trying to be clear during the task force process was, no, you can weave this into your current licensing practice already. So at your next scheduled sort of sit down with the licensing officers or the police licensing, that would be the opportunity to do it. And discuss together, okay, these ones, we think should come off, and these ones we should. And I think as part of the call for evidence, an area where we're really interested in people's views on is what counts as a minor variation and what counts as a major variation for this purpose. So certainly we wouldn't be suggesting that any conditions relating to sort of hours or big ticket items that would significantly change the trading style of or the hours or core elements of the operation should come off. But there'll be plenty of conditions that are on there that, as we say, shouldn't be on there, but still, can impact trading that should come off as well. So what they're asking for are examples of what we think should be conditions considered for removal. Now, there's not a specific list of these are all minor variations, but there is a list of three or four or five, which are usually considered major variations. So I think our starting point would be anything that's not a major variation, impacting, the core elements should effectively be considered as part of this process, as well. But again, that's when we'll put some more detail into the response and have a chat through with our licensing guys next week. But all in all, the overarching piece here for people to go back on is yes, we agree that this is a good process to bring in and spring clean these licenses. Next slide, please. So yeah, statutory notices and newspapers. So this is bit one that's been yeah, we've been pushing for a number of years. So initially brought in 20 years ago, with the rationale behind it that local people should know when a new license is coming into an area or an existing license is being changed in a way that might impact them, and that's something, we definitely support. Residents should know what's happening around them when it comes to licensing. But the way of delivering this, we feel, i.e., premises having to pay local newspapers or companies operating local newspapers to put notices into hard copy local news, that's outdated, we feel now. And that's a cost for business that can easily be removed, for a number of reasons. One of which is around the widely varying levels of fee that is charged across the country. So there's no consistency, transparency, right of appeal when it comes to how much you have to pay. You're told this is what you pay us to advertise in our local newspaper. There's the well-documented decline in readership of local newspapers over the last 20 years. People get their news elsewhere and find out what's going on in their local community elsewhere, i.e. online. And we feel that this is a good opportunity, and government have agreed to look into this to sort of, make this fit for the 2020s and beyond. So there's suggestions in the call for evidence about how this may be achieved, talking about online portals, online delivery, and we feel that a variation of that is the best way forward here to remove a cost that when you look at it, maybe individually in some areas you think, well, it's not that much, but it adds up over, to a significant amount across the piece. And again, there's just and there's a fairness point here that, we feel that businesses shouldn't in effect have to be funding this for no reason. And also we're making clear that this doesn't in any way remove any visibility for local residents. Hard copy notices remain online portals remain, and in fact, it probably improves transparency, if anything else, for what's going on in local areas. Next slide, please. Outdoor trading, as Kate said, this is one where with COVID, we had some positive moves to in effect, free up some of the restrictive ways of accessing outdoor trading that existed pre-COVID, which was all great. And obviously, it's been positive that things like pavement licenses have been retained in principle, and that sort of thing. But what we're keen not to happen is that positivity, that sort of freeing up of outdoor areas that we saw during and post COVID is then sort of drifts away, and over time is sort of chipped away and sort of made more difficult again. Big focus of the task force around this. So there's some practical things that can be done with pavement licenses. So making sure, at the very least, that 2 year grant is actually 2 years and not less than that, and also opportunities to look at maybe extending that period for pavement licenses. There's some common sense things around off sales treated as on sales. If you're taking a beer out to a garden or a pavement license from the pub, for example, that's not really an off sale, is it? That should be treated as on in our view. So again, it's just making sure that where these good things have come in and may not necessarily sit together that well at the moment, we have another look at it in the round to make sure that, okay, outdoor trading, we've got a sensible system in place to go forward with, rather than, something that's sort of slightly piecemeal potentially at the moment. So we think it's a good opportunity to do that and maximize that for future years. Next slide, please. So temporary event notices, the extension of the amount that we are allowed over COVID was increased. Great. No evidence at all that there were problems here. Tens are useful things, and simply an increase in the allowance is something we fully support. And again, usefully, we can point to where 10 limits have been extended in the past. There's been no reported disorder or anything like that related to it. So I think this is a simple one where we're saying yes, please, to more tens over the course of the year. Next slide, please. Blanket policies, yeah, these are things like your cumulative impact areas or your core hour policies and those sorts of things. Again, not in the legislation itself. These are things that have sort of been created, creatures of guidance, if you like, that have been created over the years and have come in and with the intention that they were sort of brought in to address a specific problem in an area and then removed once issues have been resolved and sort of licensing carries on as normal. Issue being, in a number of areas, these things tend to hang around, so they sort of rolled over. The evidence used for them may be out of date or not quite right, and so on. So, we use the task force to highlight stricter measures around how these are implemented. So proper evidence-based, time limited, reviewed. So really that we're not stuck in a position where we have sort of blanket local policies restricting numbers of licenses or hours that just sort of roll on forever. And that obviously has the benefit for the trade in general, if we can get a more sensible use of these sorts of things going forward for new licenses opening up and benefiting local areas as well, I think, allowing for more evolution of different offers. Next slide, please. Data protocol, yeah, important one coming out of this is around giving licensing officers more power to make recommendations to committees. So obviously that democratic element that sits in licensing with the licensing committee, really crucial to the act. But allowing that expert voice from the licensing officer to have greater weight as well, which we feel will actually lead to a more efficient, fairer licensing process. And there's a couple of other sort of elements in there that are designed to reduce the need for appeals, reduce some of the combative elements that can sort of spring up around licensing. Again, with that intention of making it a smoother system. So again, we'll go into more detail with members on some of the specifics on that. But overall, it's a good idea, and yes, please, we'd like to take that forward. Next slide, please. So festivals, again, as Kate mentioned, Task Force had industry more widely represented. So there's some moves in there around freeing up festivals and and supporting larger events. And I think that's something we would agree with in principle. Again, benefits to wider hospitality coming from those as well. Next slide, please. Then agent of change, an important one. So this is around new development coming in, residential, for example, new flats are built, no uh, mitigations are put in place by that developer for noise, for example. New residents complain about, the venue next door that's been there for 40 years or whatever, from the noise, something that's been big issue for a number of years. Agent of change, in essence, what does that mean? It puts the onus on that developer or whoever putting the new flats up, for example, to mitigate against any noise issues. So basically, it's their responsibility, not the venues, once the developer packs up and moves away. Really good element, but needs more teeth in the licensing side of things. So some really good work and moves done on the planning front. Again, linking it to licensing and giving both of those elements some actual sort of weight behind them to make sure that principle is being used consistently to prevent those issues that we've seen where venues are suffering because of developers and new developments next door through no fault of their own. So a positive there. Next slide, please. So hospitality zones. So again, not much detail in the call for evidence, but as mentioned, this isn't about the detail at this stage. This is government getting the green light to sort of say, yes, we as stakeholders think these things are good ideas to explore. And hospitality zones is one that's come up from experiences in other jurisdictions. And in essence, potentially allow local authorities to sort of draw a ring around an area and go, okay, for this town centre or for this area, we're making hospitality the focus for it to bring in customers, of course, which then will benefit other parts of the town. So hospitality-led regeneration, that sort of thing. And yeah, obviously we'd be supportive of this in principle. And again, I think it's one where a lot of benefits potentially to come out of it, but obviously more work to be done about how it actually works in practice. But again, in terms of a positive idea and way forward, we think it's a good one. Next slide, please. Yeah, sort of just to go over before I hand back to Kate, just sort of why respond. Yeah, for licensing, again, as Kate mentioned, government aren't looking at this as, this will help, solve all the ills of the trade. But in a licensing front, this is the biggest package of positive stuff that we've seen at any one time. Industry-led recommendations. So what's in front of us here is been informed by industry already. It will deliver cost and admin savings over time. Again, not necessarily on a big ticket basis, of course, but on a day-to-day sort of front. Hopefully leads to a more permissive environment from local authorities and police in general. If you've got a big focus on licensing reform, people looking again at licensing and going, oh yeah, originally was for, developing areas and positive elements, we might get a mindset change across licensing more broadly, which I think, would be a positive thing. As Kate said, others will be putting their oars into this consultation, residents, anti-alcohol groups, etc. So again, it's important that the trade voice comes through strongly. And they need to, get the support to take these things forward and develop them in more detail. And yeah, we don't know if and when we would ever get this chance again to try and reduce some of this red tape and some of these problems that have been around for a number of years. So again, it's a point in time, it's an opportunity to try and make of it what we can really. So back to Kate for the next slide. So you're muted, Kate, just to turn off.
Oh, there we go. One would have thought that after several years of doing these, we would get used to not being on mute and make that kind of rookie error. Just to add to what Jim has said as well, I think there's an awful lot, if we get this national licensing policy framework right, there's an awful lot that can be delivered through that in the same way that we get on planning. So really critical, and this is a good first step to get that in. We can get further change going forward. And as I said, this is a template for government to use for further red tape and deregulation cuts. And they're already talking about sprints on planning. on high streets and looking at creative ideas. So how to get involved? Two ways, really. Directly through us to be able to feedback your ideas, thoughts, questions, concerns. And we, as I said, have a follow-up session that will go into a deep dive to be able to explore that with licensing specialists so that we can look at that. There is a government template with the link there. You can go through and simply say that you agree. So it's a very quick and simple exercise. You just click the agree button so that we get the weight of numbers saying that we endorse these proposals and move on. And there are also free text boxes that would give you greater examples to be able to explain why you want to do this, how it would work, or ways in which you can look at other changes and areas that you want to add into it. And we will be providing templates for that. So do get involved. We need everybody to say that yes, deregulation is a good idea, and to provide us with your thoughts and case studies for how it would help. I think that ends our presentation, and we are both willing, able, and have about 15 minutes left to be able to answer any burning questions that anybody may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. And perhaps, Izzy, just might, yeah, final slide here, just to, reiterate what Kate said. We've got an explainer on the website. We'll have the draft lines to people this week. Again, some suggestions of what you might want to put in those text boxes, or a couple of those questions you think, well, I'm not quite sure what to put in here. We'll put what you may want to put in there as well in that response. A couple of expert groups coming up, as I say, licensing guys next week, and late night as well. It's just as an opportunity in the round just to take any views from people as well to make sure that everything's captured ahead of that 6th of November deadline. But as Kate says, if you've got any questions you would like to put to us now, very happy to do so.
Izzy, do we have any questions in the chat? Please feel free to put questions in the chat, and we will be able to see them. I'll give people a couple of minutes to think about them and put anything burning down in there if you do have some.
And as ever, this webinar has been recorded. So if you would like to share this with your licensing teams or anybody after presentation, and feed anything via email, by the contacts on the slides, please do that as well. Very happy to take those.
Great. I can't see any questions coming through. I think, Jim, that was a really brilliant tour de force of going through the detail of it. Jim and I held the pen on a lot of these recommendations, so we can answer any specific questions in due course. I'd just seen one that's come through about weddings outside of core liquor serving. Does this include premises licenses, including weddings? Yes, it does. All of the proposals relate to on-trade and on-premises licenses rather than off-license. So there isn't anything that is really particularly being picked up here to do with off-licenses. But yes, it would include premises that were licensed for special events, weddings, particularly that TENS would be relevant there. And also we can make sure that we've got a wedding section in the national licensing policy when it comes further forward. But if we have no more questions,
There's one
oh, there's one
here.
in the Q&A. Wondered about the detail of the policy framework. Are there specifics to what is being included, or are each of the other elements part of it? So that will be taken forward post this call for evidence. We can include in there in the responses to the call for evidence ideas of what we would like to see included. At the moment, the idea is that it would recapture the original spirit of the original licensing guidance that came out in 2004, which had very positive overview of what licensing should and shouldn't be taken forward, how it worked and interacted with planning, conditions being necessary, proportionate, and essential, licenses being granted in the form in which they're captured. So I think it is that kind of broad spirit that it's going to look at, but it will also cover some of those areas around how other statutory regimes interact with it. Another question there coming in about how any indication of how quickly any agreed changes would be implemented. The government is keen to move as soon as possible on these. So some of it will be how quickly they can change legislation. But the reason that we're only going to be given 4 weeks and the 6th of November deadline is because some of this will be answered and be taken forward as part of the finance bill with the budget. Not to say that these are budget measures, but that's a portmanteau bill that can look at amending legislation. So we could see changes coming through that by the end of the year.
Yep.
I'll just give people another minute or two about any further questions they may have. But as Jim said, we've got the licensing group on the 30th of October, the late night group for operators on the 4th of November, and Jim, Jack, and myself available if you've got any other quick questions about this. May well be that we do another follow-up when we've got indications coming back from government about how quickly they want to implement and some of the changes when we
Yeah.
know what the scope of the changes will be.
Yeah, absolutely, Kate. And just a word on that licensing group on the 30th. If people who would like to get into a bit more of the detail who are not necessarily sitting on that group, everyone is very welcome. So just let us know. Happy to take views and representation from anybody who wants to sort of get into the weeds of some of this stuff a little bit more next week.
Brilliant. I can't see any other changes, so I am going to give you all 15 minutes of your day back. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Jim, for taking us through the detail of the proposals, and we look forward to being able to deliver some of those changes as quickly as we possibly can. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.